Here's what we know about Oscar nominations. There will be outrage. And this year, it's over the nomination of the short film Detainment.
It's the true story of the murder of a toddler by a pair of preteen boys. The toddler's mother had no idea the movie was even happening, and she wants its nomination revoked.
You know, usually Oscar outrage is political, but this time it's really about who has the right to tell a story in the first place. I'm Stephen Marsh, random Toronto writer.
I'm Stacey Lee Kong, a freelance writer.
I'm Donovan Bennett, host and staff writer for Sportsnet. Art imitates life, so it's inevitable that real-life tragedies will seep into our entertainment. But you have to be fair to the people whose stories you're telling.
What do creative types owe to the sources of their stories, especially when those sources are real people?
If you want to tell other people's stories, you're going to have to betray them. That's inevitable. And you know, you can have art or you can have virtue, but in this world you can't have both.
Okay, so this is not a film that you likely would have seen in theaters. It's a short film, 30 minutes, and you really have to just see it for yourself to understand why it's really set people off. So we're going to show you a clip, and then we're going to talk about how this is actually a much bigger conversation, well beyond just this one movie. Have a look.
I know the truth. I believe I know the truth.
So do I. I was there.
That's right.
You went.
You see, Robert says that he was with you, and that you were indeed in Bootle New Strand together.
We wasn't.
Robert says you were?
Yeah, we was, but we never saw any kids then. We never locked any kids.
So you were in Bootle New Strand?
Was you in Bootle Strand? Yeah, we never got a kid, but we never got a kid.
So, look, there are really powerful, even frightening performances in this movie, and it's not just about detainment, right? This is the thing, but rather about countless films and creative works that use real-life horror to tell a story. I mean, think of any war movie that you've ever seen. They necessarily take real-life human suffering and then profit from it. So is it art or is it appropriation? Taking what's not yours and then using it? Stephen, what do you think?
I mean, that is what art is. It is taking stories that are not yours and making them your own. And there's absolutely no way to escape it. Well, the only way to escape it is to essentially make PR, where you tell the stories that people want to have told about them. And anyone who doesn't do that, any journalist, any artist, anyone who actually tries to find the truth or find insight into real human dramas is inevitably going to tell stories that some people don't like. Some people who were part of those stories don't like.
But isn't the big gripe here kind of on that line, right? Mm-hmm. That it doesn't have to be so black and white. I mean, you can be compassionate to the victims.
You can't. I mean, if you're going to make good art, you have to be very cruel about getting to the reality. Because if you try and take everyone's feelings into account, you know, people have very different attitudes to their own stories than the reality of their stories. That's just part of the human condition.
But I mean, the family wasn't even consulted, right? I mean, they were sort of blindsided by all of this. So the treatment of the film is one thing, but ought the director have said, look, I'm making this film?
Yeah, he should have. For me, this conversation, your perspective is, I consider myself a citizen that happens to make content.
Right.
So my inclination is to have empathy for the people who it affects. But if you consider yourself as a content maker who happens to be a citizen, then your loyalty is really in the storytelling. And I think to your point that they aren't mutually exclusive. To tell the best story, I think you need to not only give a heads up, but also talk to the people who it impacted so you have their perspectives. You don't have to use it, but I think you need to have it as part of the conversation.
But okay, so here's the follow-through, though, to your point, because if you approach the family, if the director did that and said, look, I'm making this film, here's how I want to do it, and they say no, then
what do you do?
What do you do?
So I see both of your points, because I do think there's an argument to be made for the value of this film, or that there is an argument somewhere. But I do fall on the side of compassion. I feel like if you're going to talk about a family whose child was killed in a horrific way, you know, I think you can expect distance from an audience. Maybe you can look at them and the audience can say, oh yeah, you know, I can say there's a value to this film. But I don't know I can expect a mother whose child was tortured and murdered to have that same distance. And I think...
So we should stop reporting on murder?
No.
Because no victim of murder wants reporters around their door trying to figure out what happened. Like no time anyone.
That's not true. That's not true.
It is almost always true. I mean, you can talk to reporters. They go and knock on doors to people who do not want to talk to them to get to the truth of the story.
The point is they knocked on the door.
Yeah,
right?
they asked.
The time for the director to say, my compassion to the family was not when he was on the red carpet, is when this project was greenlit.
And let's make the distinction, though, that I mean, there's a difference between journalism and news stories and reporting and what this is, right?
This is even much less invasive than any form of real journalism, which is always invasive, right? And certainly novel writing, fiction is always invasive of people's motivations and of their spiritual condition. But this is just literally court transcripts. Right? I mean, it is literally the performance of things on the public record.
But that's even more reason why you should talk to the families, because you can't derive enough about anyone than just by reading their text.
Okay, Stacey,
guys, I have a thought.
Stacey, I want to go to you, but first, I do want to let the director speak for himself. So, obviously, we know that there's a lot of support for the family of the victims in this case. There's an online petition with 160,000 plus signatures against the film, against the fact that it was nominated for an Oscar. So here's the director of the film defending the decision not to notify the family, speaking with Irish media. Have a listen.
You know, in hindsight, I think we probably should have got in touch or just let her know that we were going to make it. But first of all, we never imagined the film was going to get this level of attention when we were setting out to make it. But also, there's more than one perspective on the case. And we wanted to make a film that was impartial and focused, solely on the factual material, which has been public knowledge for 25 years.
Stacey, do you buy that? That this is based on factual material in the public domain?
No, for so many reasons. So first of all, I understand that in North America, we were all aware of this case, but it didn't become the same cultural touch point that it was in the UK.
And what is it that you find then most contentious about the film, but maybe also the way the material is treated?
So here's what's funny is that I don't actually, I see an argument for making the film. So I obviously went down the rabbit hole of Googling this entire case, and I realized or read a lot of the media coverage and the way that these boys were portrayed, and they weren't portrayed like human beings. So I can see his argument for why he might want to explore this subject matter.
And what is the consequence of that, I mean, almost looking at these boys as human, right? And we're talking these 10-year-old
absolutely.
killers.
And in the clip, that was a kid. He was little. He was crying. He was a 10-year-old. He was not some foreign thing that we couldn't understand. So I get the parents and the mother saying, I don't want them humanized. I think if you're asking about the value of humanizing them, we need to grapple with that as a society, that there are people who can go wrong.
Well, to humanize people requires, it requires inspection. It requires, which requires some people not to like your perspective.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is just the way, that's just reality. When you are looking at people's lives and then taking a perspective on them, you are necessarily controlling a narrative.
Stephen, I don't know if I want to live in that society, my friend, because it's a slippery slope. Because then you could say, well, the paparazzi should follow people and they get in car accidents, right? Where do you draw that line? I think there has to be a place where we say, I'm not comfortable at covering this for my gain, no matter what you think as a subject.
Well, then the alternative is just that people with power just don't get their stories told. And that's a horrible world. I mean, the question is here, do we want the stories or do we not want the stories? And I want the stories.
I want to move on, if we could. I have a feeling that we could talk about this for hours, not just minutes or dozens of minutes. But this is another subject that got a lot of people talking, a documentary about a festival that was billed as this sort of luxurious experience that ended up being a complete gong show. This is from Netflix. Have a look.
We were working around the clock, no sleep.
Billy's like, bring more workers. We need more workers.
Every single day it got more intense.
He just would not take no for an answer. And he just kept pulling money in somehow.
Desperate people do desperate things.
He was lying to investors and making it seem like we were making a ton of money when we weren't.
I mean, that's fraud.
So there you have it. So Fyre Festival, this was a major story, made headlines. Predominantly, it was in 2017, right, that this all went down. And it was an event that was driven almost entirely by this celebrity social media campaign. Lots of people bought into it. Many expensive tickets were sold. It ended up severely under-delivering. There were criminal charges, as you just heard. Donovan, we see train wrecks all the time. What was it about this one in your mind that made it stand out?
It was Instagram on an island. And I say that to say that Instagram is not your real life. It's the highlight reel of your life. And this was promoted on Instagram as being one thing, but ultimately it wasn't. And it shows our culture now. We've come to a place where everyone is really engaged and no one is really informed. And whether it was the party goers or the party planners, they cared about engagement and not informing themselves on what they actually got into. So they were literally sold something that was fake, that started fake on social media, and they ended up buying into that tile on social media, and it brought it down on social media when we saw a cheese sandwich on social media, and we realized that all the beautiful pictures that they saw, Bella Hadid and pigs swimming in the ocean, all that was not real, it was fake. So that's why I find the entire thing fascinating.
And do any of you have sympathy for the people who bought into it? I mean, on some level, I mean, the marketing would have been
I have a little bit of sympathy. I have a little bit of sympathy. But, okay, they were targeting people who weren't necessarily primed to be thinking critically, right? Like, they're targeting young, wealthy people. So, well,
too much
now
money,
I have.
not
I
enough
know.
brains. That's like she must be like, wow.
I actually said those words and I was like, oh, I might have to dial this back. But like, okay, if you have more money than sense, 99% of me is like, no, you deserve what you got. But there is 1% of me that is imagining walking up to those janky like FEMA tents that were soaked because it had rained the night before, and being like, oh, that's terrible. For you.
If a millionaire gets mugged, it's still awful. Like, it's not, like, I don't really feel, like, they're all going to be fine. Like, it's not Yemen. Like, like they're a real thing. But what I really wonder about is why it was so satisfying to watch. Why it was so deeply satisfying to watch all of this blow up in people's faces.
Because you're
like,
sadistic,
well,
Stephen,
is it
that's
like,
why.
speaking of personal cruelty, is it just like, or is it also that, like, we all operate on social media in this fraud that we're and just to actually see it crumble as a real thing was just so satisfying. It's truly a must-see.
That is the note on which we will have to end. We're just barely scratching the surface, I'm sure. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.